Phillip Noyce is here. He first came to Hollywood in 1989 with the film Dead Calm, starring a then unknown Nicole Kidman. He went on to make such blockbuster thrillers as Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and The Bone Collector. This year signaled a change for the Australian filmmaker. He has returned to his roots with two smaller independent films. The first is The Quiet American, based on Graham Greene's 1955 book about the American conflict in Vietnam, and the second, Rabbit Proof Fence, deals with the true story of the kidnapping of Aborigine children by the Australian government. I am pleased to have Phillip Noyce at this table for the first time, and I say that with admiration for him. Welcome. Great to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here.
A couple of things. Let's talk about Quiet American first, and then talk about Rabbit Fence. This is a good year to be Phillip Noyce.
It is by a stroke of luck, or not luck, misfortune. I happened to make two films back-to-back, starting with Rabbit Proof Fence, a story set in Australia, and then 8 weeks later, after shooting that film, I found myself in Saigon, in Ho Chi Minh City, starting principal photography on The Quiet American.
But what's great about it, too, is this is a case of a film director who bet on himself, who said, I've been in Hollywood, I've made those action-adventure films, and I can do it, and I can make some money doing it, and I'm not, but it's not what I want to do. I want to be at home.
Well, it was what I wanted to do.
But not then. It's what you want to do at the moment.
I love being in the dream-making machine.
Yeah.
I love being on the inside. I love driving through the gates at Paramount Pictures for about 5 or 6 years, going to my pre-assigned parking lot, and I love making movies that I didn't have to fight to get made. I didn't have to fight to sell to the audience. Yeah. But I was a migrant guest worker. I was an outsider. I was making other people's stories. It wasn't how I started back in Australia, as engaged in a debate with the audience. Yeah. And I guess, I just wanted to make stories that meant something to me personally, again. But I had a great time in Hollywood.
Okay, I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying, but you did make a conscious decision that you wanted something more. You wanted to be at home.
Absolutely. I wanted to make my stories. And I wanted to go back to Australia. I wanted to make films that entertained, but I also thought might make a difference. Might engage the audience.
And did you feel stronger about doing it because you had proven that you could do the other thing, making big bucks?
Well, The Quiet American was not an easy film to get financed. I had a great team looking for the money. Sidney Pollack and Anthony Minghella were the executive producers. Yeah. But it took Sidney 12 years to find the money. It took me 6 years. I came on to it 6 years before we finally made the movie. But in many ways, if I hadn't served my time on making those big-budget extravaganzas in Hollywood, no one would have given me the $24 or $25 million, taken a bet on bringing The Quiet American home.
That's my point. And how much money do you think it'll make, Quiet American?
I hope that it returns all that money, but who knows?
Okay.
It's just started here in America.
How significant was getting Michael Caine to star in it in terms of the rest of it?
Very significant. Michael Caine plays Thomas Fowler, London Times correspondent in then Saigon in the early 50s. He's a man who is required by Graham Greene's story. It's based on Graham Greene's classic novel.
He was a journalist himself.
Yeah. He's a man who has to do things that really do test the audience's loyalties for the character. Extreme actions. Yeah. He's not really a hero. He's an anti-hero in this film. And we needed an actor who really did project humanity. And a particular skill was required because you don't have to condone this character's actions, but you need to be with him, no matter how extreme the choices that he makes. And Michael Caine has the ability, that rare ability, that essential ability to open up his heart to the audience, to let you in, even if it's a black heart. You can feel it, you're there, you understand him, you don't have to agree, but at least you're sympathetic, and you're with him.
All right, let me see this. Take a look at this clip. You'll see Michael Caine as Thomas Fowler in The Quiet American.
Intention of behaving badly. As a matter of fact, this is exactly the kind of situation where one should behave badly.
Please just lower our...
Why don't you bugger off?
Thomas, there was a lady here.
This lady and I know each other quite well. She tried to get a rake off from me, but now she's getting one from Pyle.
We have a lot of work to do, Thomas.
If Pyle phones, tell him I called. It would be polite to return a visit.
What was it about Fowler, and I think you've already said it, that you wanted to show? The moral ambiguity, you wanted to show what? Or is he just a vehicle to get at the dilemma of Vietnam and America looking at, coming in to try to influence the tide that it sees rolling over Southeast Asia?
This is a complex film. It's a love story, it's a political thriller, it's a whodunit, a murder mystery, right. And it's a treatise on American foreign policy as it's been practiced for the last 50 years. That's not my work. It's Graham Greene's work, right, written back in the mid-50s. But, you know, Thomas Fowler is the classic journalist, the man who sees all, but perhaps is now addicted to not having an opinion, not taking a side. The journalist's dilemma, in a way. This is the story of someone who's forced to choose.
He's drawn in because of relationships.
He's drawn in because of a relationship with a woman. Fowler is has a sinecure there in Saigon. He sends home 3 stories a year.
Lives a good life.
He lives the good life. He's reinvented himself in the arms of his young Vietnamese lover. He's on the edge of the war, but not really a part of it. He's on the edge of the battlefield. He's close to danger, and he loves that, but never really in danger. And then the quiet American, a young American aid worker played by Brendan Fraser, comes to Saigon and makes friends with Fowler, befriends him, and steals his woman.
All right, I want to show that tape. Roll tape, we'll see the scene where Fowler learns that Brendan Fraser wants his girl. Here it is.
I've fallen in love with you.
You fall in love with me?
Please believe me when I say I've never behaved like this before. I apologize. It is abrupt and it is ill-mannered, but I'm in love with you.
Let's toss for her.
What can you offer her?
With all the abilities that you said that Michael has, he also talks about you. What does a director do for a guy like Kane, who's seen it all, done it all, won awards, shown that he can handle?
You don't pretend that he needs you. He does, but not to be told how to act. In a way, you've got to make a guy like Michael Caine feel secure, feel supported, feel that he can make himself naked, because that's what an actor has to do.
Yeah.
But, my God, don't get in his way. He doesn't need you. He needs your support, but he doesn't need you to...
He needs you to free him up so he can only act.
And, you know, most of the direction that I do is in the preparation. With Michael, I introduced him to journalists who had worked in Vietnam during the conflict.
You mean people like who?
Well, just people,
okay,
correspondents.
Right.
Carl Robinson, who was Newsweek correspondent there, for example. I introduced him to people who were now living a life like Fowler, having reinvented themselves in Asia, run away from themselves, as it were. I introduced him to people who had been opium addicts in their time, men who had worked in Vietnam and Southeast Asia and had fallen in love with local women. I took him around all the haunts that his character would have frequented.
In Saigon.
In Saigon.
Yeah.
And he absorbed that. It's like a process of osmosis. And then it all comes out. But it's mainly him. You know, you've just got to make him feel safe. In a way, a director has to have a hard back and a soft front. Hard back because everyone around you's got to believe that you're going to go forward. Right. Soft front because you've got to make everyone feel that they can say anything, no matter what, you'll accept it. You know, that you're open.
What does A Quiet American say? What's this film say?
In many ways, it's a cautionary tale. That although it was written in the mid-50s by Graham Greene, and although it was about the early stages of the misadventure in Vietnam.
French was still there before Dien Bien Phu.
French was still there. The Americans officially hadn't gone in yet, along with the Australians, of course. Greene writes about the quiet American Alden Pyle, supposedly an aid worker, really an operative of the fledgling CIA. And he gives us a portrait of the evangelist, the evangelical American political animal of the early 50s, engaged in a holy war against the ism of that time, communism, a genuine evil. A man who wants to do good, wants to save the world, a man who is imbued, like America, then and now, with a sense of responsibility for the rest of mankind as the melting pot of all humanity, but a man who, perhaps in his desire to do good, maybe kills with kindness.
You think this is a time for this film to be seen in America because of where it is in its own, as it sees its own responsibilities around the world?
Absolutely, of course. I mean, the issue for the whole world over the next 30 years, while America remains supreme, is how will this country exercise its enormous power, its enormous influence? Will it be done responsibly or not? And obviously the missteps in Vietnam are something for us to always keep in mind.
The two great questions, I think, is one is how does the United States exercise its role in the world? And what forces rise up in opposition to it? What combination of forces, and ideas rise up? Those are the big questions that I want to grapple with.
Sure. And it is heartening to see that, I mean, there's nothing about the movie, but just as an outsider with an interest, it is heartening to see that, that President Bush, is working through the United Nations. It's also heartening to see that there's some debate about what to do.
Right. Let me turn to Rabbit-Proof Fence. It is 3 a.m. in Australia. You are sleeping.
No, it's 3 a.m. in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles?
Yeah.
You're sleeping in Los
Australia,
Angeles?
I'm sleeping in Los Angeles.
Right.
Someone's ringing from Australia.
And they ring you, but it's 3 a.m. and you're sleeping.
That's right.
And you don't want anybody to be calling you at 3 a.m. because you're asleep.
Well, not only that, but when this call was received, I had a silent number. I'm a highly paid Hollywood director.
Yes, you're on the A-list.
Yeah, only studio heads ring me up, or people in the family who have got problems.
Exactly.
Big trouble.
Yeah, so it's
and
either
it was trouble.
It's either got to be somebody in trouble, or B, somebody willing to dump a lot of money.
We hope, yeah.
Into your lap.
And
it wasn't
trouble.
either of those.
No, it was trouble.
What was the
It was a screenwriter, your worst fear in Hollywood. Screenwriters got your silent number. They're going to bug you. They'll never leave you alone.
Yeah.
It's a woman at the end of the phone with an Australian accent. She says, I have got the perfect story. You're the perfect director to make this story into a movie. I said, to a lady, I hear that every single day in this town, but usually in the daylight. And what I realized was that, or what I thought I realized was that this was a script stalker. And unless I was gentle, I was going to have to change my number. I didn't want to do that. Yeah. Had it for years, wanted to keep it for those people who did have it. I eventually read it and realized that she wasn't mad.
Did you
I
read?
Was.
Did what?
I was mad. I was the mad one for not responding.
For not responding.
But also, when she said, I've written a story about the stolen generations, I really, truly did think she was talking about a rock and roll group or a rock and roll movement.
Yeah. Did you know this story?
I didn't know this story.
At all?
And
You're from Australia?
I am from Australia, but it's a mark of how long I'd spent in La La Land, in Tinseltown, cut off from reality. But it's also a mark of how ignorant we Australians are of the history of our Indigenous population. And that's a real indictment. Just to tell you the background to this, it's a story of
it's an amazing
three
story.
young Aboriginal girls back in 1931 who, as part of official government policy in Western Australia and across much of the continent for 70 years, were forcibly removed from their families to be placed in an institution, one of many across the country, for forcibly assimilating Aboriginal Indigenous children into white society, particularly so-called half-castes, children of mixed marriages.
Teach them how to be white.
To teach them how to be white, to rescue them from their heathen ways, to teach them English and discourage them from their Aboriginal culture, supposedly to give them a chance in white society. And this is the story of one girl, a 14-year-old, Molly Craig, who decides that she doesn't want to be brought up the way the government has decreed, and she's going to go home to her mother. And she sets out with her cousin and her sister and embarks on one of the great journeys of all Australian history and one of the great escape stories, one of the great human escape stories, because these three kids set off in search of the rabbit-proof fence that bisects the country and maybe will lead them home.
That's their guide, the rabbit-proof fence.
That's their guide, yeah. There's this
which sort of separates...
Well, it separates another long story, forgive me. 1850s, an Englishman decided to cure boredom in the colonies by importing some English rabbits. The idea was to go rabbit hunting. Unbeknownst to him and everybody else, there was no natural predator for the English rabbit in Australia.
So they multiplied like crazy.
They did what rabbits will do, and pretty soon there were about 5 million rabbits for every human being.
So they needed a fence.
They needed a fence. The fence was built from the bottom of Australia to the top. When it was completed in 1907, it was the longest fence in the world, at least that's what they say in Western Australia. And it's that fence that brought Europeans to these girls' homelands. Their dads were fence workers working on that fence.
I see. Now, I should make this one point. Kenneth Branagh's in here.
Yes.
Now, why'd you cast him?
Kenneth Branagh plays A.O. Neville, the ironically titled Chief Protector of Aborigines. He was a Brit. Kenneth's a Brit, so it seemed appropriate to get an outsider, not an Australian, to play the part. It also helped with trying to sell the picture. I mean, imagine, it's a film set in 1931 in outback Australia. It stars 3 little kids who have never acted before, never even seen a movie before. That's not an easy project to sell to anyone. Kenneth Branagh certainly helped us. But he's also a fine dramatic actor, and another reason is that he read the script overnight, agreed to do it instantaneously, almost,
All right, roll tape. This is Kenneth Branagh, in which he inspects the young girls at the Moore River Settlement.
Moore River Native Settlement, yeah.
Here it is, roll tape.
Those are our watchwords.
Molly, keep still.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Nope.
What is it about this film that has sort of captured the imagination of critics and audiences that have seen it? I know of no one who's gone to this movie who doesn't come back to me and say, it's in some cases, surprisingly, I really liked it. What is it that you think grabs
It's the universality of the story. It seems to be about 3 Aboriginal kids back in 1931 in the outback of Australia, but it's actually about the relationship, the love, the interdependence between every set of children and their parents. And that's why it appeals to people. It digs in, it goes beyond the details, beyond the history, to something universal, like all movies that we love. Sure,
and great novels too.
Yeah.
They find a universal thing that
it's in the story.
Everybody can identify with.
But also, who could be more seemingly powerless than a 14-year-old Indigenous kid, the one we see there in the clip.
On a long trek home.
Not recognised, having no status within the society, taken 1,500 miles from her homeland, setting out with no food, no water, no compass, no way of knowing where home is, except it's somewhere to the north. And it's the determination, fueled by love, I think, that appeals to people, the determination of that kid.
Did you see this in the script right away?
I did. I'm reading this script and I am finding that I'm becoming a child again. I remembered, taking a shilling, 10 cents, hopping on a bus when I was about 10 years old and riding to the furthest point that 10 cents would take me and getting out and realizing that I was lost. Of course, it's nothing like what she went through, but I also remembered, as a parent, that terror for a moment in the department store when my daughter, I thought, was lost. My goodness, where is she? That terror, that primitive instinct that any parent feels of concern for their children whenever they're separated.
Right. Yeah. Roll tape here. We'll take a look at this. This is where Molly and Daisy and Gracie escape from
Moore River.
Moore River, the aforementioned Moore River. Here it is.
Come on, get your things. We're going.
Where are we going?
We're going home to Mother.
How are we going to get there?
Walk.
That trucker, he's going to get us and put us in that boot.
You're not going to get us and put us in the room. We just keep walking. The rain will cover our tracks. Come on. Quick. Come on.
The adventure begins.
The adventure begins. I must point out, this is a real story. This is not fiction.
Right.
This really happened. And
and the documentary filmmaker who called you,
yes.
she had done the documentary.
The eldest girl there is Molly Craig.
Right.
Her daughter also, or two daughters, were taken from her under the same policy. One came back, Doris Pilkington Garamara, who about 40 years later found out the story from her mum and wrote it in a book called Rabbit Proof Fence, or Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence. Christine Olsen, the documentary filmmaker, read the book, wrote a screenplay, and then, of course, contacted me.
Where did you find these kids?
These three little kids.
Who were 11. The oldest was 11 when they made the film.
Yeah, Evelyn Sampy is 11,
14.
The other one is 9, and the youngest kid who plays Daisy is 7. We found them by conducting a search like Gone with the Wind through network television in Australia, encouraging...
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
you used network television?
First, the Today Show.
Yeah, right.
The Australian equivalent of NBC's Today Show. Encouraged parents all over the country to write in with photographs and suggestions. And then I set out with my casting director by four-wheel drive, by light aeroplane, by boat, and sometimes walking, and visited literally hundreds of small communities in out-of-the-way places in the outback of Australia, where families and kids were still in contact with traditional Aboriginal culture, and more importantly, connected to nature, as kids would have been, these kids would have been back in 1931.
Yeah. So what was it about Evelyn Sampy? Is that her name?
Evelyn Sampy is the eldest,
Plays Molly. What was it about her that sold you after this exhausting search?
I recognized something that I've seen before. I saw it when I did a screen test for Nicole Kidman when she was
for Dead Calm or something else? Dead Calm, right?
For Dead Calm. Evelyn comes in, and as is the cultural tradition among some Indigenous people in Australia, you don't look someone in the eye. That's considered slightly offensive and confronting. Right. You look down, you avert your gaze. Yeah. And that's what she was doing. And she was very, very shy. We could almost not hear her when she spoke. And I started to just photograph her as she was talking to the casting director. And I'm looking through the lens, and then I'm looking back through with my eyes, and I'm seeing that there's alchemy occurring between her and the lens. Yeah. She's larger than life, much larger. You know, models have got this quality, but models often can't act. Right. Great actors have it. It's a relationship that is partly, you know, they've inherited, but it's partly some innate ability to engage the light and the lens. And that little kid had that.
And Nicole Kidman had it.
And Nicole Kidman had it, yeah, of course. And Angelina Jolie is another one that I've worked with who, you know, you recognize. I mean, I think you've had her here on your show.
Yeah, well, Nicole as well for an hour. Yeah.
But, you know, both of those women are larger than life in real life, but the lens has a particular wonderful relationship with them. And they're able to tell us stories, make characters, you know, very vividly through the lens.
What is it about Australia, you think, that's all you creative people are having your day in the sun?
Well, I guess in the case of Russell Crowe, for example, you could say that if you want a real man, go down to Australia.
Yeah, well.
Given the preoccupation with plastic surgery and altering the possibilities.
Exactly. All right, so, but what is it about? I mean, is it something about being in Australia, which is a very modern state at the same time?
No, it's because we have two cultural models. We've learnt from the British in terms of acting, in terms of direction, concentration on story, on character, and we've learnt from America. We were all brought up on British and American cinema and theatre, and you know, we're able to combine, I hope, the best of both, but also we're independent. You know, we're very close to the American culture, yet we're also a little cynical about it. Maybe that helps, certainly in the case of directors.
I just mentioned these films, Dead Calm, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, and The Bone Collector. And now, quite impressively, The Quiet American and Rabbit Proof Fence, directed both by Phillip Noyce. These are terrific films, and you will be moved and touched, and they'll make you think. And what more can we ask of good movies? I thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure.